Hello, human geographers. We are back at it again this evening. Tonight, we will be examining the internal structure of cities. This lesson looks at a variety of different models that attempt to explain how cities are set up around the world. As you can see, there's a lot of vocabulary terms tonight. So take a moment, pause the video, and read through these terms. All right. Now let's identify the important pieces of each definition. Functional zonation is the idea that different zones have different functions. The concentric zone model is a model of rings. The sector model is heavily influenced by transportation routes. The multiple nuclei model has several nodes of specialized use. The peripheral model goes by a different name, so let's change that in your notes. Cross out peripheral model and change it to the galactic city model. But the galactic city model is a model of a city with a large suburban area. The Latin American city model obviously is based on cities in Latin America, but the unique and defining feature of the model is its commercial spine. The McGee model is a model based in Southeast Asia. Now that we've introduced each of these terms, let's look at the basic principles that influenced their development. Tonight, we start with the concept of functional zonation, or the idea that portions of an urban area, zones, have specific and distinct purposes or functions. Those functions could vary from housing residents or a residential zone to retail, sales, and office activities that often take place in a commercial zone. The other major concept that influences our models of urban land use is bid-rent theory. We covered the bid-rent theory when we discussed rural land use in von Thunen's model. Tonight, though, we're examining urban land use. To review, the bid-rent theory argues that the cost of land, called rent, is based on the usefulness of a place for specific functions and its accessibility for groups using that zone. If an area is more accessible, certain groups are willing to pay more for that land, driving up the cost. So to illustrate this, land is more expensive near the center of a city and cheaper as one moves towards the periphery of that urban area. And commercial land users desire access to other commercial activities, to markets and to labor, so they're willing to pay more for that land. As a result, the Central Business District, or CBD, tends to have high land values, tall buildings, busy traffic, converging highways, and mass transit systems, thereby increasing its accessibility to more people and increasing its land value. So let's dive into the models that are based on the concepts of functional zonation and bid-rent theory. This slide examines the North American models. We start with the concentric zone model. This model was created in 1924 by Ernest Burgess and was the first major model of urban land use. Burgess was a sociologist and argued that cities are essentially set up as rings around a central business district. The CBD would house commercial activities, and the remaining zones correspond to what Burgess identified as different life stages. The zone in transition would be industrial as well as low-quality, low-cost residential housing. It would have small apartments and tenements and the newest immigrants to a city. In each subsequent zone, people move further out as they make more money or need more space, and thus residences improve in quality and increase in size, while population density declines. The zone of independent workers are the blue-collar workers and often second-generation immigrants, and we tend to see ethnic neighborhoods in this zone. Zone of better residences are the middle class, and the commuter zone are the the wealthiest residential areas. The next model is the sector model, created by Homer Hoyt, who looked at economics more than sociology. The key feature of the sector model was the influence of transportation on the development of urban areas. He noticed that wealthy individuals lived in a wedge extending from the CBD along quick and efficient commuter routes, such as streetcar lines or elevated railways. This wedge would extend toward more desirable land in a city, such as high ground, areas near waterfronts, or places with abundant space. Likewise, the industrial zone would extend along freight railroad lines or canals, as Alfred Weber would expect to reduce transportation costs for industry. The model places the sectors for the low-income, lower-quality housing next to these industrial and transportation zones. And here is a major note to make. There is a pattern that emerges in nearly every model. The lowest income residential zones tend to be closest to industrial areas on land that is less desirable, while the highest income housing tends to be farthest from it. The multiple nuclei model was created by Chauncey Harris and Edward Ullman in 1945. And as you can see, it has more zones and more functions than the concentric zone or sector models. This model is based on the fact that by 1945, the downtown CBD was not the same focal point as cities were growing more rapidly. In this model, activities have separated as cities become more functionally complex, and zones influence each other. Manufacturing, both heavy and light, repel high-class residential, as we saw with our other models. But the outlying business district might attract higher income residential and other amenities like theaters and restaurants. By 1945, we were beginning to see suburban sprawl as car-based living became the norm. These rapid changes led to the development of the galactic city model, which is our final North American model. The defining feature of the galactic city model are edge cities, which are suburban places with office, retail, and some housing, located along a beltway or ring road that encircles the urban area. Activities disaggregated as the inner city declined in influence. Those activities moved to key freeway intersections to keep activities accessible. So regional shopping centers, high-tech corridors, industrial parks, office complexes in suburban downtowns became the new centers of economic activity. And by the mid-1970s, more Americans were employed in suburban areas, like edge cities, than in the CBD. Examples like Tysons Corner, Virginia, which is outside Washington, D.C., Irvine, California, outside LA, and Phoenix, Arizona, support the galactic city model. Shifting gears, let us look at models of international cities. Cities in different parts of the world were created under different cultural, historical, and technological circumstances than those in the United States. But these models are still based on functional zonation, just like the North American models. And we'll begin with the Latin American model, which was created by geographers Ernest Griffin and Larry Ford. This model combines concentric rings with sectors. The CBD has a traditional Latin American street-oriented central plaza and a more modern high-rise sector, just like you might see in North America. The most defining feature is the commercial spine, which is an extension of the CBD. It contains theaters, restaurants, parks, and other amenities along a major boulevard that extends out to an edge city referred to as the mall. The spine is surrounded by elite, high-income residential areas. And as distance increases from the center of Latin American cities, the quality of housing decreases. So the poorest residents live farthest from the city center, which is the opposite from North American models. And this is a pattern that is true for most cities outside of North America. The poorest areas often lack access to water, sewer, electricity, paved roads, where crime may be rampant. Housing in the peripheral squatter settlements are self-built by families, often on land that is not formally owned by them. And the poorest communities are often found on the worst land, like steep, unstable mountain slopes. Next up is the Southeast Asian city, created by T.G. McGee. The focal point of these cities was not a CBD, but rather the old colonial port zone with surrounding commercial districts. And the traditional functions of the CBD have disaggregated to other zones, like the Western Commercial Zone. And due to Chinese immigration into Southeast Asia, the Alien Commercial Zone is dominated by Chinese businesses. The high-class residential is again closer to the city center and farther from the new manufacturing region of the city's periphery. Squatter settlements are mixed with middle-class suburbs, and the model includes a market gardening zone where light agriculture takes place. Our final urban model comes from Africa. In North Africa, cities are influenced by the religion of Islam. So the dominant feature is a centrally located mosque with tall and highly visible minarets. Around the central mosque will be schools for children and soup kitchens for the poor. And sub-Saharan African cities show the imprint of European colonialism. One of the defining features is the presence of 3 CBDs. The traditional CBD existed before European colonialism and has lots of single-story buildings and small shops. The colonial CBD has broad, straight streets and large homes, parks, and administrative centers. And the market zone is an open-air, informal market and is essential to the city's residents. Another defining feature is that residential neighborhoods are based on ethnicity rather than economics. Surrounding the city, as with the Latin American and Southeast Asian models, are the peripheral shanty towns that have grown due to rapid in-migration from rural areas. These areas are densely populated without sufficient public services. To finish up tonight, while it isn't a formal model, I want to make mention of how European cities are set up. These cities are older with narrow, winding streets. The suburbs of Europe are again going to have the lowest income residents and newest migrants. Ethnic neighborhoods in suburbs are products of migration from former colonies, such as Algerian neighborhoods in Paris and Moroccan neighborhoods in Spain. The downtown core attempts to preserve the historic character of the city, with leaders limiting new construction and restricting the height of new buildings. That was a lot of different models that we covered tonight. We'll look at some of the similarities and differences between them when we get back to class. Have a good night, everyone.